Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video of the playlist, we'll dive into the 6th chapter of Freud's book on mass psychology. So grab your coffee and let's begin. So far, we have examined two artificial masses and found that they are dominated by two different sorts of emotional tie, of which the one to the leader appears to have a more determining influence, at least so far as the mass is concerned, than the other, namely the tie that binds the individuals of the mass together. However, in the morphology of masses, there is still much that needs to be examined and described. One would have to take as one starting point the observation that a simple crowd of people does not in fact constitute a mass until such ties have become established within it. But one would have to concede that in any large group of people, the tendency to form a psychological mass emerges very readily. One would need to note the different kinds of mass, some more durable than others, that occur spontaneously and to study the conditions of their coming into being and their decay. Above all, the difference between masses that have a leader and leaderless masses would occupy our attention. Whether masses with leaders are not the more natural, more complete ones, whether in the others the leader may not be replaced by an idea, an abstract concept, to which of course religious masses with their physically intangible head already form the transition, whether such a replacement is not supplied by a collective tendency, a desire in which a great many persons can share. That abstract concept might in turn be embodied more or less fully in the person of a secondary leader, as it were, and the relationship between idea and leader would produce an interesting range of possibilities. The leader or the guiding idea might also become negative, so to speak. Aversion to a particular person or institution might have as unifying an effect as positive devotion, evoking similar emotional ties. The question then arises, among others, is the leader truly indispensable so far as the essence of the mass is concerned? However, all these questions, some of which may well be dealt with in the literature of mass psychology, will be incapable of diverting our interest from the basic psychological problems that present themselves to us in the structure of a mass. To begin with, we are gripped by an observation that promises us, by the shortest route, proof that it is libidinal attachments that characterize a mass. Take the way people in general behave towards one another emotionally. According to Schopenhauer's famous allegory of the hedgehog seeking warmth, no one can bear the intimacy of too close contact with another human being. On the evidence of psychoanalysis, almost every close emotional relationship of any duration between two people, marriage, friendship, parenthood, childhood, includes a sediment of negative, hostile emotions that escapes perception only because repressed. It is less veiled when partners quarrel or when subordinates grumble about their superiors. The same thing happens when people congregate in larger entities. Whenever two families join together as a result of a marriage, each considers itself better or more respectable at the expense of the other. Of two nearby towns, each will become the bitter rival of the other. Every little parish looks down on its neighbor. Closely related peoples feel a mutual revulsion. South Germans cannot abide North Germans. Englishmen constantly insult Scots. The Spaniard despises the Portuguese. That greater differences result in virtually unbridgeable aversions. Gaul versus Teuton, Aryan versus Semite, white versus black, has ceased to surprise us. Where the hostility is directed against otherwise loved persons, we talk of emotional ambivalence and explain such a case to ourselves in what is surely too rational a fashion by the many occasions for conflicts of interest that arise in just such intimate relationships. In the unveiled emergence of aversions to and revulsions against close others, we recognize the expression of a self-love, a narcissism that, in seeking to assert itself, behaves as if the occurrence of a departure from its individual manifestations implied some criticism of those manifestations and a call for their reshaping. Why so great a degree of sensitivity should have seized upon these particular details of differentiation we do not know. Unmistakably, however, such human behavior implies a readiness to hate, an aggressiveness whose roots are unknown and that one would be inclined to characterize as elemental. However, all this intolerance vanishes, temporarily or permanently, as a result of mass formation and in the mass. For as long as the mass endures or as far as it extends, the individuals behave as if they were uniform. They tolerate the other person's individuality, treat that person on an equal footing, and feel no aversion in his regard. That kind of reduction of narcissism can only, according to our theoretical notions, be generated by one factor, by libidinal attachment to other persons. Self-love finds bounds only in love of others, love of objects. The question will immediately be asked whether community of interests alone, without any libidinal contribution, will not in itself inevitably lead to toleration of and consideration for the other. To counter this objection, it will be pointed out that, in fact, no permanent reduction of narcissism comes about in this way, since such toleration lasts no longer than the immediate advantage drawn from the other's cooperation. But the practical value of this dispute is less than one might think. The fact is, experience has shown that, as a rule, where there is cooperation, libidinal bonds are produced between comrades that extend the relationship between them beyond what is advantageous and pin it there. The same thing happens in human social relationships, as psychoanalytical research has found in the process of individual libidinal development. The libido, taking its cue from the satisfaction of the major life requirements, selects the persons involved in that process as its first object. And, as with the individual, so too in the development of mankind as a whole, only love has had effect as a civilizing factor in the sense of a turning away from egoism towards altruism. And that applies both to sexual love of a woman, with all the compulsions that flow from it in terms of sparing what the woman loved, and to that desexualized, sublimated homosexual love of the other man, which has to do with working together. So when reductions of narcissistic self-love appear in the mass that have no effect outside it, here's compelling indication that the essence of mass formation consists in new types of libidinal ties among the members thereof. Now our interest is going to be very much in knowing what kinds of tie those are within the mass. Up to now, our psychoanalytical theory of neurosis has concerned itself almost exclusively with the attachment of such love drives to their objects as still pursue direct sexual goals. Clearly in the mass, no such sexual goals can be at issue. We are dealing here with love drives that, without being any less vigorous in their effect, have nevertheless been deflected from their original goals. It so happens that we have already, in the context of ordinary sexual object charging, observed phenomena that correspond to a deflection of the drive from its sexual goal. These we have described as degrees of being in love, acknowledging that they imply a certain impairment of the I. We shall now be devoting more thorough attention to these phenomena of being in love, in the well-founded expectation of finding in them relationships that can be transferred to attachments within masses. But we should also like to know whether the kind of object charging with which we are familiar from sexual life represents the only avenue of emotional attachment to another person, or whether we need to consider other such mechanisms. Psychoanalysis does in fact teach us that there are other mechanisms of emotional attachment, so-called identifications. Too little is known about these processes, and they are difficult to describe. In fact, examining them is going to take us away from the subject of mass psychology for quite some time. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check the books available in our link in the description. There you'll find many fundamental marketing books in different languages. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more psychology-related content. See you in the next one.